Why don't you tell us exactly how they've moved in for control of the common people through the control of education? Do you want to tell us about that triumvirate of Dwight and White and Gilman?
Well, there were three men back in the 19th century, three members of the order, whom I identified as being at the very beginning of our modern educational system. One was Gilman, he was the key man. Another was Dwight, who later became president of Yale University, and the other is White, who became president of Cornell University. The key man is Gilman. Gilman was a member of the order. In 1856, he established the Russell Trust. Within the order, they call it the RTA in their correspondence. RTA, for short, was the legal entity which is the financial vehicle for the order. And then Gilman, White, and Dwight all went to Germany. And in the 1850s, the 1860s, they were graduate students in Germany. And that was the time of when Hegel, the philosopher Hegel, was very prominent in Germany. And I have some of their early letters in which you could see that they've picked up the philosophy of Hegel, which is the complete antithesis of what we understand, certainly in the United States and England. For Hegel, the individual is subordinate to the state. This is what they picked up. This is what they brought back. When Gilman came back, he first became president of the University of California. He didn't last too long, because a man called Henry George was then editor of a San Francisco newspaper. Henry George, a socialist in quotes. Henry George was an unusual man. He was against monopoly. They call him a socialist, but actually he was anti-monopolist. Henry George spotted Gilman. He didn't like him. He wrote scathing editorials. In the end, Gilman wrote a letter to Dwight, I think it was, and said, "I'm going to have to leave here before the roof falls in." So they found him a job as president of Johns Hopkins University. At Johns Hopkins, he began the process which ended up in control of the modern educational system. He brought in a psychologist, G. Stanley Hall, who had been trained under Wilhelm Wundt in Germany, the founder of experimental psychology. Hall began the process which ended up, by the way, John Dewey did his doctorate at Johns Hopkins under Gilman and under Stanley Hall, came under their influence. But John Dewey, who is the core of modern education, was already a Hegelian in thinking. These people just put a rubber stamp on it. And then came a process which you see time and time again. A man who is not a member of the order, but whose direction in life is towards their goals, is helped along. And you can see this in the careers of Hall and Dewey, who are really quite inconsequential men. But they were pushed and promoted and pushed and promoted. And Hall certainly never knew why he had such a successful career. He didn't know behind the scenes, when he needed money, the money was there. When he needed another job was there. And that's what happens with the people of use to the order. Anyway, to come back to Gilman, Gilman made sure that Hall brought Wundtian experimental psychology to the United States. This, through John Dewey, ended up in the Lincoln School, the experimental schools, the experimental educational laboratories at Columbia University and at University of Chicago, funded by Rockefeller money. Also in one of my books, I have identified, I think, 500 or 600 doctorates which were awarded by this very small group out of Johns Hopkins. So within about 20 years, these people had awarded doctorates to hundreds of people identified as those already thinking along these lines. So anyone who's an individualist or tends to be a man alone, or who doesn't believe in political power, the use of power for amoral purposes, got shunted to one side. So I can understand why many people, and I've met them over the years, wondered why they never received a doctorate. Well, I can give you one answer, is that they weren't thinking the right way to get a doctorate to appeal to a certain committee. So anyway, out of this came our whole Dewey system of education, and if you look at John Dewey, you will see John Dewey says what Hegel says, that the function of education is not to bring out your innate talents, not to see what you're good at and help you along. It's not to educate you, not to teach you to read or to do arithmetic. That's not the purpose of education at all. And John Dewey is quite clear if you read him, and so was Hegel. The whole function of education is to prepare you to be a part of the state apparatus, is to prepare you to be a useful little cog in the workings of the state.
So it's Orwellian.
It's Orwellian, but it's Hegel. You find freedom in obedience to the state, which is upside down to us. But
so here we are in 1984, and parents and educators in America alike are in an uproar over the low scores of our high school students. And you've written another manifesto on the order, how the order controls education. Now in this one you expose this little triumvirate and the evolution of the control of education, and you point out their introduction of the look-say method later on, and how this was originally for deaf mutes.
Yes, the look-say method of reading, in which I wasn't brought up that way, thank goodness, but apparently you look at a word and you're supposed to be able to recognize the word from just by looking at it without breaking it down into
Yes, like Chinese hieroglyphs.
Letters,
you have to memorize 1,000.
Well, that was originally developed in 1818 by Golladay for deaf and dumb people. Works fine for deaf and dumb people. And very ingenious and a very useful invention if you're deaf and dumb. I can see that. But then apparently someone in the order recognized its usefulness, because two Golladays, the grandsons of the original Golladay, were inducted into the order. You'll find two Golladays in the order, grandsons of the original inventor of this, and you get Horace Mann comes along in 1840, and through Antioch College, which was controlled by the order, the Taft at that time. This is how I say people who are not in the order but are useful to it get pushed along. Horace Mann was useful to the order, was brought into Antioch and pushed along in his career.
Listen,
Horace Mann picked up look-say, and look-say came through John Dewey, and that's what we have today. You wonder why the kids can't read. Of course they can't read.
I have to laugh, Tony, because I went to Antioch.
Oh, excuse me. Well, you know about the trustees were Taft.
Oh, I know a lot about Antioch, and I know how it felt to be there. But
well, I didn't know.
It prides itself in being very liberal, very free, and very individualistic.
Well, liberal in quotes, because if you look at these systems, they are anti-liberal in the sense that I understand it 100 years ago. They're not liberal in the sense of freedom. But I certainly didn't know you at Antioch, so you're in the right position to challenge anything I say.
I don't have any defense of Antioch. You know, I learned a lot there about a lot of things, but I smile about it because Horace Mann is certainly a very important figure in their history.
Okay.
What I think is amusing about this look-say method is that it is used to keep people deaf and mute today.
Yes.
Who were not born that way,
yes.
but were made.
Yes. I've been horrified. You know, I used to teach University of California. I was horrified at graduate students who couldn't spell or write a simple sentence. I don't know how they ever got there. I mean, they were bright kids.
Well, the worst thing about young people who can't really read and write well is that they sense themselves inferior, are intimidated, and do not seek jobs that require good communication and articulation, and that is exactly what the order wants to do.
Exactly.
Is to keep the bright people that come up out of the middle class from assuming those positions.
Exactly.
Now, I'd like you to go on and tell us what you think is the next most devastating accomplishment of the order in education as you've exposed it in your book.
I think it was to bring the experimental psychology of Wundt in Germany. He was the first experimental psychologist. And his idea was that we're all the subjects of stimuli. You know, we get hit on the head, so we take moves not to get hit on the head again. Everything we do in life is brought about by external stimuli. And Hall recognized this. He studied under Wundt in Germany and brought the Wundtian method to the United States. This is the basis of the experimental schools in education, that you can stimulate and prod a student to follow a certain road. I think it's the Wundtian psychology that is
well,
vital.
it's the animal theory.
The animal theory, exactly.
And of course that excludes the concept of the interior self and the process of education being the process of the unfoldment of that inner self, the meshing of the soul with the mind, with the physical body, the development, the drawing back from the subconscious of the accomplishments of previous embodiments, the talents of existence, and therefore education contributing to the ongoing evolution of the soul, who does not begin and end with a physical body.
But, of course, Wundt is essential for the Hegelian theory of the state. If you're going to be a cog in the state, you've got to see yourself as an animal and is subject to external stimuli. You can't see yourself as an individual with a soul that needs development.
Well, history has proven that no one, no power, and no system can ultimately control the person in whom the divine spark is still ignited and where that flame of freedom is. And so freedom transcends all of this attempt to control. The only way you can control anyone is to first make him into either an animal or a mechanization man.
If I can interject a comment here, it's very interesting that I think the order recognizes this. Within their correspondence, I pick up complaints. The people are not responding as they expect to be. They expect them to respond. They're too individualistic, and they're worried. They are definitely worried. In fact, I have one letter from one member to another in which he tells his friend to not give up. Don't give up. And here we've got all people in the, in the outside free world, as I call it, who are worried that they're going to take us over. Look, they're the ones that are worried, not us.
We shouldn't them, be. Right?
Well, there's only a few of them. There's 200 million of us in the United States. There's only 500 of them or so right around today. I mean, we can remove them if we had the power.
Well, we do have the power.
Oh, at some point, yes, when people know.
People have the power when they know they have it.
Yes, exactly. And this is why you have to keep these things secret. I mean, once they become open, the power to a great extent is gone. But the point I want to make is they are worried. They're worried because people don't accept what they want.
Tony, speaking of education, what are the controls, let's say, at Oxford and admissions to other major schools in this country and at the high school level, and how do they really control higher education worldwide?
Oxford is a very important link in a world pattern. Carol Quigley, who wrote Tragedy and Hope, used to be professor of international relations at Georgetown University, identified the British equivalent to the order, as known as the group. The group stems from Oxford University. And so what there is in England is a rather similar order, which has liaison with the order in the United States. That stems from Oxford. How they control admissions, I don't think they control admissions that closely. I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is twofold. One, at the doctorate level. You're not going to get a doctorate in any Western university if you argue against or produce evidence against the major direction of the order.
Is that really true?
I think that is true.
In any major Western university?
Any major Western university.
Today?
Yes. This is another story, but I've been quite surprised at the links, for example, between British universities and American universities at that level. Secondly, in the development of a career, you're not going to be hired in certain areas if you have strong views which are against the requirements of the order. For example, you're not going to become a commentator on CBC if you're an outright exponent of individual rights. Now, I'm not saying that none of the existing commentators are members of the order, let me put it that way, but directors of the networks are. But one cannot say that any present commentator on television is an outright exponent of individual freedom. They're all tinged in a little way with this collectivist aspect. In publishing, you're not going, or as an author, you're certainly not going to make strong headway. I've identified so far a dozen publishing firms with members of the order, and it only takes one to turn down a book. So this is the problem you get. It's not at the acceptance level of a university, but when you get to the doctorate level or when you begin to develop your career. So my suggestion would be, if in your career you run into roadblocks, and if you're in a career that might possibly have some usefulness to the order, you better look at your own philosophy and see if it is collectivist enough or not. And if you want to make some headway in this world, you better become a collectivist.